You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barros-Friedman here with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Quote, "My name is Mahmoud Khalil and I'm a political prisoner. I'm writing to you from a detention facility in Louisiana where I wake to cold mornings and spend long days bearing witness to the quiet injustices underway against a great many people precluded from the protections of the law." That's what the Columbia University graduate and student leader said in a letter dictated from the prison where he is still being held more than 10 days after U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement arrested him from the university-owned apartment building where he lives in New York City on March 8th. Khalil adds, "My arrest was a direct consequence of exercising my right to free speech as I advocated for a free Palestine and an end to the genocide in Gaza, which resumed in full force Monday night. With January's ceasefire now broken, parents in Gaza are once again cradling two small shrouds, and families are forced to weigh starvation and displacement against bombs. It is our moral imperative to persist in the struggle for their complete freedom." The government's government's attempt to deport Khalil, which he is challenging in court, is part of an aggressive crackdown by the Trump administration targeting supporters of Palestinian rights. This morning, news broke that Badr Khansuri, a postdoctoral scholar at Georgetown University and a citizen of India, was arrested Monday night outside of his Virginia home by officers who identified themselves as Department of Homeland Security agents. According to his attorney, Suri was targeted because of his wife's, quote, "identity as a Palestinian and her constitutionally protected speech." This week, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee filed a federal lawsuit on behalf of students Momodou Tal and Sriram Parasurma and Professor Mukoma wa Ngugi, whose activism in support of Palestine has put them at serious risk of political persecution. The lawsuit seeks a nationwide injunction to halt the administration's efforts to target and deport international students like these plaintiffs and Mahmoud Khalil. According to Eli Clifton, our next guest, the Trump administration's unprecedented decision to seek the deportation of Khalil, a U.S. permanent resident, without bringing any criminal charges, has an overlooked ally. She is Miriam Adelson, the Israeli-American billionaire who is the largest financer of Trump's 3 presidential campaigns. Eli Clifton is a senior advisor at the Quincy Institute. He just wrote the article, "The Israeli-American Trump Mega Donor Behind Speech Crackdowns for Responsible Statecraft," the publication where he is investigative journalist at large. He joins us now to talk more about Miriam Adelson's role. Welcome, Eli.
Thank you for having me.
It's really good to have you. And if you could just start by reminding us quickly who Miriam Adelson is and who her late husband, Sheldon Adelson, was. Where did they get their money from? And in broad terms, how have the Adelson family been using this money in recent years?
So the Adelson family, and specifically Sheldon Adelson, made billions of dollars, largely with his development of the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, which is a company based, as you might guess, in Las Vegas, Nevada. But it's important to keep that in mind. That owned at its peak, or certainly at the peak of its American presence, the Venetian Casino in Las Vegas. He's had sort of segued from running conventions in Las Vegas. The Comdex convention was something he helped spin up, and he turned this into a fortune worth, in excess of $30 billion, which is now, while it is still called the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, it really isn't in any sense connected to Las Vegas other than being based there. What it really is an Asian gaming company. Most of their casinos are in Macau, a special administrative region of China, and they have a casino in Singapore, the Marina Bay. But that doesn't mean that they have family. Sheldon Adelson died in 2021, but that his family, now led by his wife, Miriam Adelson, are any less active in American politics. If anything, they've scaled up their involvement. Miriam Adelson was born in Israel. She's an Israeli American, dual national, and that gets thrown around a lot, I should say, especially in circles where people are concerned about the influence of Israel, claiming that people are dual nationals, where in some cases they are not. And I think it's a dangerous thing to use that label when you can't prove it. It's in SEC filings. It's established that she holds dual citizenship, and the Adelsons themselves have been, and again, I think a lot of donors in the political space are very coy about what they want and who they are and why they give money. I think that's a bad thing. And I think the Adelsons, to their credit, certainly when Sheldon was alive and going on now with Miriam, are very outspoken about that their primary interest in being the largest donors to the Republican Party is really focused on Israel. That is their first and foremost concern. Maintaining zero daylight between U.S. administrations and Israel is really the most important thing to them, and the thing that they take a great deal of pride in their philanthropy as well as in their political donations. So I think that sort of sums up her role. She's time and time again, Miriam Adelson, and she's become more public since Sheldon's death in 2021. He used to speak for them more than she did. But it's very clear that she holds, if anything, views probably more hawkish and to the right of where he was in terms of what she thinks U.S. policy in the Middle East should be. And the fact that she sees Trump as sort of serving sort of a biblical function in defending Israel, which is kind of striking, again, coming from the person who has overseen the most political contributions going to Trump's entire political career, openly has written that she sees him, and the reason that she loves him so much isn't because of any of his domestic agenda or politics. It's really about his support for Israel, something that he delivered on in enormous ways in his first term, and that she regularly brings up, and that included delivering on the Golan Heights, abrogating from the U.S. from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, something that, again, they had talked about quite a bit as the family had wanted. And sort of the final step in that was that the Trump administration, this is the first Trump administration, wanted to make sure that whoever came next wouldn't be able to so easily move the embassy back to Tel Aviv. And the way that one of the steps they took was to sell the ambassador's home in Tel Aviv, and they sold it to the Adelson family. So that sort of tells you about what these
Mhm.
people want, why they give their money, and again, they're very open about it.
Mm. And of course, Sheldon Adelson, who was US born, an American citizen, famously said at one point that he'd served in the US military during World War II, I believe. And he said he regretted that he had served in the US military and not the Israeli military. So that gives you a sense of where their loyalties and priorities lie. But in your article for Responsible Statecraft, you write that tax documents reveal that Miriam Adelson is directly overseeing a social media campaign targeting Mahmoud Khalil and Columbia University through something called the Maccabee Task Force. Well, I'll ask you, you could talk about what the Maccabee Task Force is and how it has been involved in the Trump campaign, but also what is Miriam Adelson's role in it?
I would just add, I don't think it was World War II. He was old. He wasn't that old. But
It might have been. You may be right about
he
that.
did
That he did
serve,
so.
though, and he did
Yeah,
make those comments.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Um, So what the Maccabee Task Force is something that was started in 2015 with a pretty modest donation from the Adelson family. They donated a little bit over $2 million to an organization that was going to be focused on college campuses. And they, quote, said it was to combat disturbing spread of anti-Semitism on college campuses. But they were pretty clear, again, from the launch, what that really meant. And they said that it really was focusing on rolling back the perceived successes of the boycott, divest, and sanctions, the BDS campaigns against Israel. which Maccabee Task Force characterizes as, quote, an anti-Semitic movement that crosses the line from legitimate criticism of Israel into the dangerous demonization of Israel and its supporters. So again, they're pretty upfront about what they were doing, why they were doing it, what the motivation was. And Maccabee Task Force, it really scaled up. And eventually they brought over David Brogg, who was the head of Christians United for Israel. He came over to run it. And really well, it started with that modest contribution. Between when they launched and 2023, the last year that there are publicly available tax filings for the group, the Adelsons had put in nearly $70 million into it. And again, this is happening alongside, and I think this is meaningful, the Adelsons being the largest donors to Trump's political career, as well as to the Republican Party, to congressional races, to gubernatorial races. They are the biggest donors. Elon Musk might be challenging them on that right now. But again, when you look back several cycles, they've put in nearly $600 million in reported political contributions. That's not dark money that they might be putting in also. So these guys are very meaningful political political donors. And the Maccabee Task Force, really springs to life with the college campus protests about Israel's war in Gaza. Partially because it's very much in their wheelhouse. This is what they were designed for, was to push back. And I think, again, credit where credit is due. I think Maccabee Task Force pretty accurately identified back in 2015 that college campuses and the next generation and young people and academics were probably going to be on the forefront of challenging the unconditional U.S. support for Israel. And indeed, they were clearly right as the protests about the war in Gaza scaled up, particularly at Columbia University, which had become the poster child for it. And that's where Maccabee Task Force, again, looking at their social media posts, which I sort of looked at, really the more recent ones even, although I know they've been very active over the past couple of years, had been focusing their efforts, was to say that what went on at Columbia went beyond what is acceptable speech, that it went beyond certainly the rules of what the university abides by, that it went beyond what the federal government should be allowing any federal funds to go towards supporting. All things which ultimately the Trump administration chose to follow up on with Columbia University, with the arrest and attempted deportation of Mahmoud Khalil. But we can talk about what those social media posts said and the fact that they went after Khalil in ways that, when I reached out to Maccabee Task Force, they chose not to respond. Since I asked them, do you have evidence? You said you called him a Hamas supporter. You said he came to the U.S. to promote chaos and destruction. These are pretty close to saying that he was providing material support for terrorism, which is indeed a felony. A felony he was not charged with. Maccabee Task Force chose not to respond to those questions. But to bring us back to Miriam Adelson and why this is particularly notable, Maccabee Task Force website lists out who their staff are, lists out David Brogg and his involvement in his leadership of the group, lists out a lot of their staff. But it doesn't list who their president is, the head of the organization. And that's only in IRS tax documents that Maccabee Task Force has to file each year. And what that reveals is that Miriam Adelson isn't just their biggest donor. She's also the president of the group. So she's, Donald Trump's biggest donor, biggest supporter, the biggest supporter of the Republican Party, is actually in the leadership, the leader of a very outspoken group targeting individual students on college campuses, cheering on attempts to deport them, making unsubstantiated claims that would suggest that they are providing material support to Hamas. And that, I think, is a pretty potent cocktail of power and money and political influence.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's, Maccabee is one of, as you mentioned, several well-funded groups like this that have been operating on college campuses for decades, spying on students and faculty, trying to develop relationships with, or have developed relationships with lawmakers, both local and national, and threatening students' families, and now, trying to get people deported for having an opinion, a political opinion. Can you talk about specifically the Mahmoud Khalil case in this context, and what the Maccabee task force has specifically done to try and throw everything they can at
Yeah.
Mahmoud Khalil, and the precedent that it sets, and what they're trying to do in that case?
Well, they didn't just go after it. Certainly, a lot of their social media posts over the past several weeks have been a combination of cheering on the detainment and efforts to deport Khalil, but also swinging at Columbia University and cheering on the defunding of Columbia University by the Trump administration. And I would say, like, it borders the line into just sort of crass social media posts. They have an enormous following on Facebook, over 300,000 followers. And one of their posts said, fuck around and find out. The sad truth is that the administration at Columbia couldn't even be bothered to pretend to care about the safety of Jewish students until the White House threatened the prospect of losing $5 billion. And so they're making wild claims against Columbia University and cheering on the defunding. When it came to Mahmoud Khalil, they claimed he was a Hamas supporter. Again, couldn't provide any evidence. They said that deporting Khalil after wreaking havoc at Columbia University campus is a positive step in the right direction. And they claimed, again, without providing any evidence, that Khalil came to the U.S. to promote chaos and destruction. These are pretty extreme claims against somebody when there are no criminal charges that have actually been filed. And one thing I do want to point to with their social media campaign and this targeting of an American university and targeting of an American permanent resident, Mahmoud Khalil, in such specific and again throwing out these unsubstantiated claims against both Khalil and Columbia, are that when you go in and you look closely at the Facebook page for Maccabee Task Force and you look at who manages it, they have something called the page transparency on Facebook that will not give you specifics about who the managers of the page are, but it will tell you sort of some basic information, such as how many people they are and where in the world they are. And what that revealed was that 2 out of the 7 managers of the Facebook page are based in Israel. And again, I think that's a pretty, we need to stop and reflect on that for a moment, that there are individuals in Israel managing what is supposed to be an organization focused on American college campuses, largely comprised supposedly of American college students, that is singling out both students and universities for unsubstantiated vitriolic attacks because of efforts to I could only describe as an effort to stifle free speech about American foreign policy towards Israel. That's pretty scary that folks in Israel are involved in actively trying to make an example out of American permanent residents and American universities for daring to permit or to engage in constitutionally protected speech critiquing American foreign policy.
And that's really, I thought, a really significant thing that you found and is in your article at Responsible Statecraft. And it reminds me of the revelations that were in Al Jazeera's documentary, The Lobby USA, which, of course, Al Jazeera, perhaps, well, certainly after a pressure campaign from the lobby, never broadcast, ironically. The Israel lobby didn't want a documentary about the lobby broadcast because they said it's full of lies and the lobby doesn't have any real power. And that same lobby managed to get Qatar somehow not to broadcast, or to pressure Al Jazeera not to broadcast the documentary. But in 2018, the Electronic Intifada obtained copies of the documentary and we published them. In fact, you can find them on our YouTube channel. But one of the key things that documentary revealed was how the Israeli government was directing and coordinating the campaign to suppress speech on American campuses. This was done through something called the Ministry of Strategic Affairs that was working directly with US-based groups, including the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a far-right neocon group that whose main job, it seems to be, is to advocate for war with Iran, and other groups like that, the Israel on Campus Coalition, and so on. In terms of sort of bringing it back to what's happening now with the crackdown, I reported last week on another extreme Zionist organization called Betar USA, and how it has been identifying and inciting against individual students, including Mahmoud Khalil, that it wants to see deported. Betar even brags about compiling dossiers about students and passing them on to the Trump administration. Do you have a sense of how coordinated these types of efforts are now, and how much collusion there is between the US government and these extreme pro-Palestinian groups, whether it's the Maccabee Task Force or Betar or any others? Do we know more about that than we learned, say, in the Al Jazeera documentary?
I mean, look, I think what you're certainly seeing is an echoing of talking points and accusations, both back and forth between the US government and these groups. And it cycles back and forth. The thing that I find the most concerning about these groups, and maybe Maccabee Task Force, again, is the exception rather than the rule here, is how most of them actively conceal who is behind them. That these are groups that have now taken the steps of cheering on, frankly, what is going to turn into, a severe challenge to the First Amendment. I hope the courts will rule that that indeed this is protected political speech, and you can't target a U.S. permanent resident for engaging in this sort of speech. But that is where we are at. And these groups are cheering it on, and they're doing it largely while concealing who they are and who's behind it. And in the case of turning back to Maccabee Task Force, the fact that they are tied to the president's biggest donor, the fact that they are tied to somebody who is very clear that they are engaged in a transactional relationship with Donald Trump when it comes to Israel, and is doing so with a huge amount of wealth and power at their disposal, is really scary. And you add into that the fact that it's not just that they are very much identify as being Israeli and or indeed an Israeli citizen, but the fact that the actual that person is the president of Maccabee Task Force, but there's that added element that the actual nuts and bolts of this campaign targeting, again, U.S. permanent residents, targeting entire institutions like Columbia University, are actually being executed and orchestrated by people in Israel. That's what we are seeing from that page, transparency of their Facebook page. And I think that what that really brings home, to sort of zoom out, and I see up in the corner it's day 531 of the war in Gaza, is to start to think about the fact that we mostly talk about the cost of this war, in terms of American credibility in the world, American ability to talk about human rights when we're complicit in this war that's taken tens of thousands of innocent civilian lives. And we talk about the monetary cost, which is also real, that the United States, through what it provides to Israel in support. But this is starting to show another cost. There's another cost of this war that is coming home, which is that the support for the war is going down. The Gallup poll from earlier this month said that less than half of people in the U.S. now are sympathetic towards the Israelis in this war. It's been a slow but steady decline in support for Israel's war in Gaza. So the steps that the people that want to maintain U.S. support for it are going to have to undertake is going to get more extreme. And that's what we're starting to see now. It's starting to impose real costs. It's starting to challenge what we consider to be, core American values and rights, our civil liberties, our ability to dissent, our ability to challenge U.S. foreign policy, to challenge any government policy, not just foreign policy, to take what we take for granted, which is that we should be able to question the United States' relationship with any country in the world, not just Israel. That this is constitutionally protected, and that it's culturally part of who we are. Groups like Maccabee Task Force, groups like Betar, groups like Canary Mission, they don't want that. They want to stifle that form of speech. And that's coming at a very real cost. Colombia is looking at, being defunded by billions of dollars. Khalil is looking at being deported. Um, it's something that is a real cost. Badr Khansuri at Georgetown is looking at potentially being deported for his wife's statements. It's just incredible to think the challenges that are being put up towards what we consider to be protected forms of speech inside this country, and that is a cost of this war, and a cost that I think now we are starting to have to pay because again, public support continues to decline. So they're going to have to use more and more coercive methods to maintain the status quo.
And those are such important points, and it's something that's been going on for years. And people tend to exceptionalize Trump because he's taking it further than others have before. But it's important to remember that the demonization of free speech about Palestine has been going on for years under Democratic and Republican administrations, and from Democratic and Republican members of Congress. And since we mentioned it, I just want to show people, because we have many people who are coming to this issue new, the Israel, the documentary, the Al Jazeera documentary, which you can find at the Electronic Intifada on our YouTube channel, or if you search just on a search engine, watch the film The Israel Lobby Didn't Want You to See, you will be able to watch that censored documentary revealing direct Israeli government intervention on in efforts to stop free speech, particularly on American campuses. I just wanted to mention that. And Eli, we're very grateful to you for your time today. And just to remind people that you are a researcher at the Quincy Institute, and you are an investigative journalist. I've been following your work for many years. You have a particular interest and knack in pulling out really important facts from very boring tax filings, and I've learned a lot from you in doing that.
They're
It's a
terribly
skill.
scintillating.
but that's where the secrets are buried, so
That's
to
right.
speak. And your article in Responsible Statecraft, the Israeli-American Trump megadonor behind speech crackdown, is really important reading. And thank you for coming on to talk about it today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eli.